Hello, this is Brad, and today I am reviewing the Surface Pro 4. The model I'm taking a look at is the one with the M3 processor and 4GB of RAM and retails for $899. Now, I'm not going to dive too much deeper than that into some of the technical stuff. If you want to see the exact specs on it, feel free to check out the description where I have a link to the exact Surface Pro that I got. I am, however, going to be looking at this from the point of view of an illustrator who likes to draw on these kinds of tablets. So for this review, I'm breaking it into three parts. The first part is the hardware. How does it work? How does it hold up? Does it perform well? The second part is the software and some of the apps that I use to illustrate with. And this last part is, can my low-end Surface Pro 4 run some of these art programs, and what are my opinions on that? This is a full-blown Windows 10 PC. Anything you can run on Windows, you can run on the Surface Pro 4. It's got a touchscreen and a really nice pen, so a lot of artists have gravitated towards these kinds of machines. The new type cover is a big step up from the Surface Pro 3 type cover. The keys are spaced further apart, and the new trackpad is bigger and less sensitive than the old trackpad. Usually less sensitive means bad. In this case, I thought the old one was too sensitive. It registered a lot of clicks that I didn't want it to. Now, the new type cover does not come with the Surface Pro 4. It is an extra $130 to get one of these. A couple people have asked, do I really need a type cover? Yeah, you really do. You don't need it, but you do kind of need it. You can get around without it, but it's really kind of awkward. It's like going to the dentist. You don't need Novocaine, but you're entering a world of pain if you don't have it. Besides, Windows was really built to be used with a keyboard and a mouse interface. Even with these extra touch features kind of added onto it extra, most of the apps still use keyboard shortcuts. The mouse is far more precise, so it really is one of those things that you should probably have. In a lot of the programs I use, when I want to draw a straight line, I have to hold the Shift key. If I want to duplicate something, I have to hold the Alt key while I'm dragging it around. All of that is done with a keyboard and a mouse. It's not to say that you can't do those kind of things without it, but it is a lot harder to do those kind of things without it. Now, my favorite part of the Surface Pro 4 is this hinge. It's actually kind of tough to get it in there, but it also means that you could set it on any angle and it works really well. I should also put an asterisk by that statement, as you can put it at any angle. When I'm drawing on my Surface, I often set my hand on it. In fact, I almost always set my hand on it. It's not going to be able to support the full pressure of your arm and your hand on that if you press on it, but if you brush against it or anything, it's not going to just move out of place or collapse or anything like that. This software thing doesn't pan out for Microsoft could always become like a Hinge company. With that said, I think the ultimate resting position is a really comfortable position for this to be at for drawing. So the pen. In my little preview when I first got the Surface Pro, I kind of gushed over the pen. There's some stuff I really like about it. So the main change here is that there's a rubber tip. It's really kind of hard to see. I don't know if you can see that in the video or not. Now, the Surface Pro 3 has a shiny glass screen. There's no resistance when you're drawing. If you think about drawing on a piece of paper, it's a little rough, so when you're drawing with a pencil or a pen, there's some friction there. Now, other products like Wacom's products put a little bit of texture on the screen. I heard the new iPad Pro also has a little bit of texture to the screen to emulate that sense of drawing on a piece of paper, so it's not as slick as just having plastic on a glass screen. What this does is roughly the same thing. It adds a little bit of friction in there, so it gives you a little bit more control over drawing. It's such a small detail, but it's a phenomenal detail, and it makes the pen so much easier to control on the glass screen. On top of that, Microsoft has released a little $10 replacement nib kit, so you can get them with like softer rubbery feels or like harder plasticky feels, so depending on how you like it and how you like to draw, it's a nice little addition for your pen. Another big upgrade to this pen is that it now has 1024 levels of pressure sensitivity. The Surface Pro 3 pen only had 256 levels. Now, on paper, this sounds really good. I mean, who wouldn't want more levels of pressure sensitivity? But in reality, it kind of feels like from program to program, the pressure sensitivity is hit or miss. Overall, it feels like the pen still needs a little bit of calibration. I'm going to go into that more when I touch on the programs in a little bit, but that was one of my only disappointments with the pen. Now, the Surface Pro has some software that lets you adjust the pressure sensitivity, so if you like to draw really softly, you can adjust and make that easier to do, or if you like the harder strokes, you can do that as well. That doesn't always affect the pressure sensitivity the way I want it to, but it is a nice feature. Another addition is the back of the pen has an eraser on it. It feels like an eraser. It has this rubbery tip, kind of like the tip of the pen. Flip it over and you are erasing. It also acts as a button. If you press it once, it opens OneNote. Hold it down and it activates Cortana, which is this Siri-like voice-operated thing for Windows 10. And if you click it 3 times, it'll initiate Windows 10's self-destruct sequence. The pen also has magnets in it, so it sticks to the side of the surface, and that's just not going to fall off. Let me talk about the magnets on this thing for a minute, because the magnets are crazy strong on this thing. Not only do you have the magnets on the pen, but the power cord also has a magnet that holds it into place. The magnets that hold the type cover on are crazy strong. These aren't just any magnets, these are like the magnets they use in space. Get ready for anything metal to stick to this. Paper clips, other pens, headphones, potatoes. Not potatoes. These are good magnets. If this software thing doesn't pan out, Microsoft could just become a magnet company. The pen also has lost that jittery feel that it had on the Surface Pro 3 when drawing slow lines. I don't know if that's because the tip of the pen is more accurate or if they just solved the problem on a software side, but either way, it's improved. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about the software I was using. So here I'm going to be focusing on the 3 programs that I know best. There's Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and Clip Studio. Photoshop's always been my go-to drawing app, mostly because I'm a web designer, so I use Photoshop all the time for all sorts of things, so I know it inside and out. Most of the time I use Photoshop for pencils and roughs and general sketching. And for those initial kind of steps, Photoshop actually performed really well with the M3 processor. I honestly expected a little bit of slowdown, but nope, runs great. Of course, I expanded on that. I did a little bit more painting and inking, and I did see some slowdowns, especially in my strokes and things like that as the file size got larger. So probably like 300 dpi, full size 8.5 by 11 size images. Once we started to get multiple layers going on in there, that's when I started to notice some of the brush stroke slowdown. Also, if I had multiple files open at one time, I'd also see a little bit of brush stroke slowdown when drawing there as well. But I really did expect a lot more slowdown than I actually saw when I was using it. It's hard to tell if it's the program that was doing it or if I was just like running out of RAM. 4 gigs of RAM when you're running Photoshop isn't a lot. My MacBook Pro has 16 gigs of RAM, and my other Surface has 8 gigs of RAM, so I'm a little bit spoiled. One thing about Photoshop that really started to get to me after I used it more and more, especially as I started to finish my artwork in Photoshop, was that the pen pressure felt a little bit off. Usually when I'm drawing, I choose a slightly wider brush than I might need, and I use the pressure of the pen to vary the width of the strokes. So here's what I saw the brushes doing. So the biggest problem I noticed here is that the pressure is just not consistent. Take a look at these strokes. You can see at the end they start to taper off in a funny way. The strokes on the left are what I'm really going for. This was done on my Surface Pro 3 using the Surface Pro 4 pen. Yeah, you can use the pen on either one. But see how the strokes on the left kind of taper off smoothly and the strokes on the right do not? That's the problem I'm talking about, and as soon as you see it and as soon as you notice it, you can't unsee it, and it kind of irks you as you're drawing. My first thought here is, hey, let me go to the built-in pressure sensitivity app on the Surface and see if I can fix this thing. But when I used that, I noticed that it also had a similar taper effect. It's harder to tell because the strokes are like very light to begin with, very thin to begin with. But using the same pen on the Surface Pro 3, you can see that they're much, much smoother. So it seems like the tapering problem is a calibration with the pen and the Surface Pro 4, not necessarily a hardware problem with the pen. I think this is really good news. One of the things I can say as a Surface Pro 3 owner is that in the year and a half that I've had it, Microsoft has supported the heck out of it. There were things like me resting my hand on the Windows button that was on the face of the device, and that would throw you to the Windows screen. They added software that let you turn that off. They also added the app that let you adjust the pressure sensitivity to begin with. That wasn't initially on the Surface Pro 3. That was added after a while too. So they have a great track record of listening to artists and illustrators, adjusting their specs over time, and making this stuff better. And I have no doubt that they're going to do that here on the Surface Pro 4 as well. Little nuances like this are just too important for them to just ignore it. I opened up the questions on the Microsoft answer site just to see if anybody had encountered this and anybody had any solutions to it. As of the time of me recording this, no one's answered that yet. No one's been able to find an answer for me yet. But I'm going to link that in the description, so if you are watching this months from now and you're kind of curious as to whether it's been fixed or not, maybe you can find some answers in that thread. So let's go to something happier. Let's talk about Adobe Illustrator. So how did that work on this low-end Surface? And I can say that it worked great. It was, it ran perfectly. I didn't really run into any slowdowns, any lags, any problems. I loaded up some bigger illustrations with a lot of points and that sort of thing. I still performed really well for everything that I was trying to do with it. Honestly, I could not tell the difference between drawing in Illustrator on the Surface Pro 4 on the low end and my souped up 8 gig of RAM, you know, i5 processor Surface Pro 3. They felt the same to me. They were both snappy. they're both good. So when you first open up Illustrator, one of the things you're going to want to do is look for the touch workspace, because one of the things that Illustrator added last year around this time was a whole bunch of touch tools that make it so much easier to use. The Surface Pro has a really high density screen. That means there's a lot of pixels and it looks amazing. That also means that the touch areas are very, very small on some of these programs, and Adobe Illustrator is one where you're moving points around a lot and using the arrow tool to kind of adjust your artwork a little bit here and there. And having that touch mode, which makes those spots bigger, adding things like an undo button to the screen and a delete button to the screen and that sort of thing, an easier color picker, a lot of that has been added to Illustrator in the last year that makes it so much easier to use. I've talked about this before in some of my videos. In fact, I made a video about it and you can check it out here. The last piece of software that I really ran a lot of tests on was something called Clip Studio. You might know it also as Manga Studio. It's the same piece of software, it just has two different names for two different audiences. Like Illustrator, it ran really well. I didn't really notice any lag at all. Also, the brush calibration, which a lot of inkers and a lot of cartoonists love in Manga Studio, I think really helped that taper problem. I did not have the same line taper problem that I had in Photoshop, which again tells me that it's a software calibration problem, not a hardware problem. I inked and colored this little wrestler dude you see here in both Photoshop and Clip Studio, and you can see in Clip Studio I added more detail and things like that, and I didn't see any slowdown at all. Here you see some of how my brush strokes really kind of slowed down a bit, and they kind of lag behind the brush. That's what I'm talking about Photoshop, and how Photoshop doesn't quite keep up the same way that Clip Studio does with the same level of art file. Okay, last, overall performance. I touched on this a lot in kind of the previous section when I was talking about software, but overall I thought this performed extraordinarily well, much better than I actually expected it to. As I said, my Surface Pro 3 has more juice to it, a better processor, a lot more RAM. I did notice the RAM a little bit, especially if I had Photoshop and Illustrator and a lot of other stuff open at once. When I clicked from one program to the other program, there was a good 1 or 2 second lag while it kind of loaded it into memory. So I did notice the RAM. If anything, I think that's probably what's slowing Photoshop down. Looking at things like battery life, I would say that I'd probably get about 4 hours of drawing time out of this. I didn't test that specifically to see how fast I could run it down or anything like that, but it seemed to be comparable with what the Surface Pro 3 was doing for me. So I'd expect, 3-4 hours of drawing time. So let's get to the main question. Should you buy this low-end Surface? And my answer is a definite, I don't know if you should. So here's the thing, if you're like me and you have Photoshop open from the time you wake up and you're using it like 8-10 hours a day, you really should spend a little bit more money, get the better processor, and get more RAM. On the other hand, if you're just looking for a laptop replacement, and you want to draw on it a little bit here and there, and it's more of a hobby thing, and maybe like 2 or 3 hours a week you're drawing on it, I think this is a really good product. One more question that I got on my little preview video last week is, am I going to review the Surface Book? And no, I am not. If you look at the Surface Book and you look at the specs of the Surface Book, it's almost identical to the Surface Pro. You could get the same processor, the same RAM. It's just the construction of it is different. And the Surface Book doesn't even have a hinge, I really like the hinge. Another question I got is, am I going to try the iPad Pro when it's released later this week? Heck yeah, I'm going to try the iPad Pro when it's released later this week. I've always wanted an iPad that I could draw on. That's what drove me to the Surface in the first place, is because I never really liked drawing on the original iPad. So I'm really looking forward to the iPad Pro and the iPad Pencil, and I will probably be sticking a link like right here in a few weeks once I get one and have the chance to try it out. So that's it. That's my review. I'm sure I haven't covered everything that you want to hear, so if you have any questions, there is a comment section down below. Also, I have found that I'm much better at answering questions on Twitter, so feel free to hit me up on Twitter with any quick questions if you want it turned around within an hour or two. I'm usually pretty good at that kind of stuff. And that's about it. If you enjoyed it, subscribe or share it with a friend or like it to help other people see it. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you later.